Okay. So let's start. We may start. Okay, so the first talk of this session, which goes about Semantics I, degrees, is the talk given by Emily Henning from University of Manchester and Andrew Carboden. I hope that I have the right pronunciation of your name. University of Manchester as well. And the topic is degreelessness, possession, and categorization in Washoe. Thank you very much for coming, and please share the screen with us.
Okay, so I'll share the screen. Was he going to show a PowerPoint, or did that just not? I thought he had said something about sharing an LSA PowerPoint at the beginning, but I'll just start, and then if he needs to interrupt me, that's fine.
No
okay,
worries,
so I'm
as Australians say. Yes, please.
All right, I'll start this video, and if there are any issues, then just please let me know, because everything looks fine on my end.
Good.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for coming to our virtual talk. We start with the observation that the grammar tied to property concepts, which are adjectives in some languages, but nouns or verbs in others, has been an area of long-standing study in both the syntax and semantics of familiar languages. However, there's been recent cross-linguistic investigation of less studied languages that has pointed to both morphosyntactic and semantic variation in this domain. Relevant especially for today are the following 2 points of variation. The first is whether the meanings of property concepts are built on a mass type core, with some possessive semantics required to turn them into predicates of individuals. And this is the case for ULA, for example, as pointed out by
Yeah. Same here. We don't have sound.
The second point of variation is whether the meanings of property concepts are built on degrees. And this goes back to a classic division in the what is taken to be the correct analysis of property concepts. So on the one hand, it's been argued that property concepts make reference to degrees in their denotations, as you see here in 3. And on the other hand, it's been argued that, and rather than making reference to degrees, adjectives such as tall simply denote context-sensitive individuals. Right, so as you see here in 4, what it means to be tall is to count as tall in a particular context. So in today's talk, we're going to focus on the interaction of these points in Washoe. We'll have 2 main claims. The first is that property concepts in Washoe are morphologically complex, like ULA, and they're formed from acategorial roots by a verbalizing B-head that encodes a possessive semantics. The second point is that the analysis of possessive predication that was put forward by Frances and Carboden for languages like ULA extends to Washoe in a way consistent with Bachnack's observation that Washoe is a degreeless language. Now, the broader view of both of these points is as follows. We point out first that there is a previously unobserved interaction between degreefulness, possession, and mass semantics in the grammar of property concepts across languages. And secondly, Washoe provides morphologically overt evidence for the previous claim put forward in Menden and Pancheva that verbal categorization introduces a possessive semantics to property concepts, allowing them to predicative individuals. The roadmap for the talk is as follows. First, we'll move on to give some background on the language. Then we'll discuss the core data that we need to address. After that, we'll present our morphosyntactic and semantic proposals. And before concluding, we'll discuss the ramifications of our analysis of possessed property concepts for a degreeless language such as Washoe. Okay, so to begin with background on the language. Here's a map of where Washoe is spoken. This is the Great Basin areal region of the Western United States. Washoe is spoken here on the border of California and Nevada around Lake Tahoe. Washoe is a very endangered language, and genetically it's an isolate, though it's been linked to the proposed Hokan group. It has an SOV word order with prodrop and agglutinative verb morphology, and the uncited data in this talk come from my field work, which I started in 2015. Okay, so now moving on to the core data that we need to address in this talk. The focus of today will be the verbal suffix E in Washoe. Now, this suffix was termed the attributive agentive suffix by Jacobson in his 1964 dissertation on the language. And he writes that this suffix derives verbs expressing the possessor of the underlying noun. So as he notes, the suffix is used productively to express general possession of an entity, as you see here in 5 and 6. Digushu ii, I have pets. Umwigit ayabiheshi, do you have glasses? However, beyond ordinary possession, the same suffix is also found in property concept predication, which will be our focus today. So here in 7, we can see this with the example, the mountain is big, the la'ak iali'i, and in 8, the man is tall, elihu ilkaikai'i. So here we see the same exact suffix here being used in the case of property concept predication. Now, something to note is that all of the above examples are verbal. So we know this, for example, because the mood marker E is present, which is the independent mood in Washoe. Secondly, we see verbal agreement, which in Washoe is prefixal for person. So for example, we have second person and first person. And also as a side note, Washoe lacks an adjectival category altogether. So in general, property concepts are expressed as verbs. Right, so another thing that is relevant to the discussion here is that what we see in the attributive suffix is distinct from possessive morphology in the nominal domain. So in Washoe, third person nominal possession is expressed by prefixal agreement on the possessum, as you see here in 9, Adele's pet, Adele Gushu, this happens to be null in the third person, unless the possessor is covert, as in 10, in which case we get Da Gushu. So that distinction isn't particularly relevant today, but this is just to show a contrast with what we saw above in Ulwa, where the same possessive marking used in property concept predication is found in the nominal domain. So in Washoe, it's not nominal, rather it's verbal, but we have the same effect. All right, so that's the main data that we were trying to account for. And the core of our morphosyntactic proposal is that the attributive suffix E is a categorizing little v head. Now, this goes back to Menon Panchava's argument that some Malayalam property concepts are categorized by a null v head, right? So they have a mass type core and they require verbal categorization in order to act as predicates. So this means that something like 13, she is good, in Malayalam has a more literal translation of she is one having goodness, even though you can't see a ton of morphology on the surface. Now, our claim for Washoe is that E is exactly this overt spell out of the categorizing V head that Menon and Panchava propose. So this means that the underlying structure of possession looks like what you see in 14 and 15. In 14, in the case of ordinary possession, E categorizes the root pet, and in 15, property concept predication, it categorizes the root big. Now, this adopts the idea that property concepts are born as acategorial roots with something extra required to make them well-formed as predicates. And here we also treat nominal roots such as pet as acategorial roots to maintain a parallel across both structures. Some evidence that E is in fact a categorizer comes from a few behaviors. So first, it's always the closest suffix to the root inside of all other derivational morphology. And additionally, property concepts on their own are ill-formed as verbs, so they cannot appear without the attributive suffix, as you see here in 16. So the intended meaning here is the mountain is big, but what's missing is the attributive suffix, and this is not possible. Similarly, nominal roots are also ill-formed as verbs, as you see here in 17. So just taking the root pet and trying to form a verb out of it is not possible. Although nominals are a bit different from verbs in that they can be zero derived as, different from the property concept roots because they can be zero derived as nouns. And this is shown in 18 with gushu a. Gushu here is derived as a nominal with no extra morphology. Now we note that one possible alternative to the categorization approach that we're taking is that what we're seeing is in fact noun incorporation, where E is not a categorizer, but a lexical verb meaning have. But we have some points that argue against this. First, there's evidence from transitivity and suppletion data of the incorporated object that argue against this type of approach. And additionally, Washoe has a lexical verb for have, which is sa, as you see here in 19, agum di sa'i, I have pine nuts. And you can see in 20 that trying to use the attributive suffix E simply as a verb to mean I have pine nuts is not possible. So what we have is good evidence that E is a categorizer in Washoe, and it therefore lends cross-linguistic evidence to the claim that V may categorize and introduce possession. Okay, so that's our morphosyntactic analysis, and now we'll move on to interpretation. The core of our proposal here is that E denotes a function mapping properties to relations between individuals and properties. So we assign E the meaning in 21, whose first argument is a root denoting a property of individuals. So this is that first argument here, which will always be saturated by the root that it categorizes. In the case of ordinary possession, the root will compose with E to return a characteristic function of individuals having some object or some thing. So in the case of pets, it will look like what you see in 22, where the root pet denotes a set of pets, and once it composes with the categorizer, then you get the characteristic function of individuals who have pets. Then when predicated of an individual, it will be true if that individual has a pet. And this is shown here in 23 with the final truth conditions in 23b. Property concept predication works very similarly to the case of ordinary possession. And here we follow Frances and Kunz-Garboden in the proposal that property concept roots have a mass type meaning, partially ordered by a mereological relation. Additionally, following Parsons, Biglini, Wellwood, and others, we depart from Frances and Kunz-Garboden and assume that these entities are Davidsonian states, which are standardly also assumed to be mereologically ordered. So what this means is that property concept roots denote sets of states, which are ordered not only mereologically, but also by a size relation, like what Frances and Kunz-Garboden assume in order to capture gradability effects. Another important aspect of the proposal is that states are a sort of the domain of eventualities, which are themselves in the domain of individuals. So this is crucial for our analysis because like any other ET type predicate, that means that the root in 24, which denotes a set of states, can compose with E in order to create a predicate of individuals possessing that state. So this is shown in 25, which is the characteristic function of individuals possessing some bigness state. And again, like in the case of ordinary possession, when predicated of an individual, 25 will be true if and only if the individual it predicates of has a state of bigness, as shown in 26. The upshot here is that the suffix E plays the same role in ordinary possession and in possessive predication. It both categorizes the root and introduces a possessive semantics. Now, in the remainder of the talk, we want to talk a bit more about the fact that Washoe has been argued to be a degreeless language. So this has been proposed by Ryan Bachnack in his dissertation and in later work, and he shows extensively that Washoe lacks any degree morphology and fails semantic tests for degreefulness. And as he argues, this behavior suggests degreelessness in the sense of Beck et al. 2009, who proposed a parameter stating that certain languages lack degree variables while others may have them. So in his analysis, Bachnack adopts an approach in which property concepts are not degreeful, but are rather contextually sensitive sets of individuals, as alluded to in the introduction on the Kleinian account. So this means that what it means to be tall in Washoe, as in 27, is simply to count as tall in the context. Now, this is relevant for us because Washoe's degreelessness raises questions for previous analyses of possessed property concepts, because this line of analysis was intended to account for Ulwa and Malayalam, which are not argued to be degreeless languages. As we show below, however, our Davidsonian analysis does not make recourse to degrees, and our proposal for possessive predication, couched in the Davidsonian analysis, handles the Washoe facts without having to use degrees in the ontology. Right, so in order to show how this works, we'll go through a couple of different types of constructions that are crucial for understanding the meanings of property concepts. And the first of these constructions has to do with positive contexts. Analyses of the positive form of property concepts need to account crucially for the fact that they are vague. And what this means is that the truth conditions will depend on the particular context of the utterance. So for example, in 28, if Mary is 5'8" and she's standing in a group of women of average height, it's felicitous to utter 28a, Mary is tall. However, if she's standing in a group of women in the WNBA, this becomes infelicitous because the context has shifted and the average height of the individual has become taller. So how do we capture these vagueness effects in possessive predication, like the contexts in 29 and 30? Well, here we can create the contrast that has been proposed in order to account for this in traditional work on property concepts. So first, on degree-based accounts, property concepts are not themselves vague, and instead vagueness is introduced by composition with pos. Now, pos establishes a relative ordering above a contextual standard. So while a degree ordering is built into an adjective like tall to begin with, this is not context sensitive, and it's rather pause that introduces the context sensitivity, stating that the height of a particular individual must exceed that contextual threshold. In previous accounts of possessive predication, for example, in Menon and Panchaba, they pursue an analysis along these lines. So for them, the categorizing V head also inherently invokes a degree ordering, as shown here in 32. However, in positive contexts, vagueness is then achieved by composition with pause. So it's pause that introduces the contextual sensitivity. This is shown in 33 for the example we had above, she is good. And the ultimate derived form of nala after composition with the categorizer and with pause results in a meaning that is sensitive to a contextual threshold. Now, in degreeless accounts, on the other hand, vagueness is built into the meaning of the predicate itself and does not require composition with pause. So this is Bachnick's proposal for Washoe, right in 34, where to be tall simply means to count as tall in the context. We don't need any sort of reference to pause here because contextual sensitivity is built in. Now, staying in line with the idea that Washoe lacks degrees, on our account, we don't make reference to degrees in the meanings of property concepts, but rather we capture vagueness through the presence of the existential quantifier in the meaning of the verbalizer, following Frances and Kunskar-Boden. So in our meaning for E, as repeated here in 35, this existential quantification will restrict the state of Y to those that are big enough in the size ordering to stand out in the context. This will make an example such as 36 true, here the mountain is big, if and only if there's a state possessed by the mountain big enough in the size order of big states to count as such in the relevant context. So in our account, using existential quantification, we stick more in line to the Kleinian account that doesn't require pause in order to derive vagueness of the positive form. Now, another construction that's crucial here has to do with comparatives. Comparatives in Washoe are implicit when they consist of conjoined positive constructions. So rather than making use of a degree morpheme like more, Washoe simply uses conjoined propositions, as you see in 37. So to express a meaning like in English, the man is taller than the woman, what we have is the man is tall, the woman is not tall. And relevant here is that these comparatives fail to give rise to Chris judgments, which involve comparison of two objects that are very close in measurement. So this is shown here in 38. So the context here is that we're comparing two ladders where one is only slightly taller than the other. And while in English it's felicitous to utter, this ladder is taller than that one, in Washoe, it's not felicitous to utter, this ladder is tall, that one is not tall. And the behavior of Chris judgments is extremely relevant because degreeful and degreeless accounts make different predictions here. On degree-based accounts, the vagueness of gradable predicates is captured by composition with pause, but that vagueness goes away with the presence of comp because the two are in complementary distribution. Now, the meaning of the comparative doesn't have context sensitivity, but requires only an asymmetric ordering of any size difference. So on this account, we predict that Chris judgments should be felicitous, which we can see in a language like English. On degreeless accounts, on the other hand, gradable predicates are always vague, and so vagueness should persist in conjoined comparatives. And now this is related to the idea that vague predicates are subject to a similarity constraint, which is shown here in 40. And in a nutshell, what this states is that speakers are unwilling to judge two objects as distinct along some measurement if that difference is extremely small. So for this reason, degreeless accounts predict that Chris judgments should not be felicitous because vagueness is always persistent, even in comparatives. Now again here, our account patterns more with the Kleinian degreeless approach, in that positive constructions are norm-related and vague, and so we capture context sensitivity even in comparatives. So as we see here in 41, the comparative is simply a conjunction of two positive constructions, and so we correctly predict the infelicity of Chris judgments, just like Bachnick's Kleinian account. Now, finally, we have to give a note on the overall lack of degree constructions, because our analysis is essentially a Davidsonian version of the one proposed for degreeful ULWA. But ULWA and Washoe behave a bit differently, and ULWA has overt degree morphology. So for example, it has an explicit comparative with the morpheme more, as you see here in 42. So the question then that arises is what the difference between ULWA and Washoe is. Here we follow Bachnick et al., who build on Wellwood 2019 in the idea that degrees are introduced by degree morphemes themselves, rather than by property concepts. So the idea here is that morphemes that make reference to degrees are not part of the functional inventory of Washoe. And without that functional inventory, no degree constructions arise. And this is the source of variation across languages. Whether or not they have degree constructions, it all boils down to the morphology that they have in their functional inventory. All right, so now to wrap up briefly, our main argument today has been that Washoe property concepts are morphologically complex, using possession to turn a mass type core into a property of individuals. And there are some larger points we want to touch upon here. The first is that the idea that property concepts have a mass type core across languages, they require some type of possessive semantics in order to make them good predicates of individuals. Now, Washoe counts as an extra case of a language that uses the strategy. Another point has to do with the interaction with degreelessness, right? So the possessive predication has been studied, as has degreeful versus degreeless behavior of languages. But Washoe shows that these two properties intersect and opens up a new typological cell in the way that languages express property concepts. Now, there are a lot of open questions to see how our typology interacts with other points of syntactic and semantic variation, but we'll have to leave these for future work. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. It's of course, for me, it's just marvelous because I'm working on it now, but I would like to ask questions. We have a little bit more, but because we started later, so let's say 7-8 minutes for discussion. All the other things can be discussed always externally to our sessions. Yes, please. So I hope that I see the questions. And yeah, you arrange your talk yourself, yeah, so you can just ask the questions and look it up and take it over, as we said, FNA. It's in German, Frage, Antwort. It's a question.
So it looks like we have a question from Liz Kopic.
Yes, please arrange it yourself. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thanks. That was very nice. And I don't want to try to challenge your main conclusion, which seems very convincing to me, but I wonder if I could convince you to share some of my doubt about the Kleinian analysis. So when I was reading and teaching this paper by Ryan, I started thinking, well, actually, Klein's theory doesn't predict a lack of crisp judgments alone, because on Klein's theory, you could have a context where John is tall and another context where Mary is tall. And so you could get even if John and Mary are very close in height. And so just based on Klein's analysis, you can get crisp judgments. So I guess you'd have to add on this similarity constraint in order to get the lack of crisp judgments. And then the question is, couldn't you just add a similarity constraint to a pause-based account? Is there anything deeply Kleinian about the lack of crisp judgments?
Andrew, do you want to go or should I?
Okay. So I think the first point, the second point, is there anything inherently Kleinian about the similarity constraint? I don't think so. The broader point is that nothing in our analysis requires Klein's analysis. So we're not actually assuming a Kleinian analysis of Washoe, really. What we're assuming is an analysis of the positive degree construction, like what Itamar and I have in our book, which is about contextual restriction of the existential quantifier over, say, an ordered domain of states. So the idea is that you have to be at a particular threshold in a size ordering of states to count as big enough in a context.
So that kind of sounds like a degree-ish.
Well, it's degree, yeah, I mean, it is degree-ish. I mean, it sounds like degrees, it's not degrees. So like Wellwood has arguments for why you want both states and degrees. So our analysis of the positive doesn't actually require access to degrees, and that's why we can do Washoe in a degreeless fashion.
Okay, thank you. I'll let other people ask
I
questions.
was asked, you, Elizabeth, of course you can ask questions. I mean, you
I think
asked.
John Beavers has a question, or at least he has his hand raised.
Yeah, so please go on. He has the time.
I'm not sure if you can, oh, okay, it says talking
Am I
permitted.
muted now? Yes, can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay. Actually, yeah, I had almost the same question as Liz, but coming from the opposite direction. I mean, there's also an existentially quantified degree on a degree-based approach. And I don't know why you couldn't have some analysis whereby the differences between degrees aren't necessarily that sharp. Maybe a degree accounts as more of an interval than a particular point, or on an interval based, you're looking at, say, an interval that could overlap with another interval in a way that you wouldn't get crisp judgments. I don't know why the degree-based approach would have crisp judgments, whereas the approach you're using with existentially quantified states wouldn't necessarily have crisp judgments. I mean, can you sort of extend the similar mechanism, but just treat it as quantification over degrees?
So the point is, you don't have to have degree. You could have degrees if you wanted, but you don't have to have them on our analysis.
Right. Yeah, I get that part. I mean, I guess my question is just whether there's actually a prediction between the two approaches about crisp judgments. Like, do they really require that you get different crisp judgment effects?
That's actually a question that we have ourselves, and we've sort of been struggling with that as well.
Got it.
You know, the conventional wisdom in the literature is that crisp judgments do distinguish between a degreeful and a degreeless analysis. One of our, Margaret Bowler, has done some work on Walbury that suggests that you can actually get crisp judgments in comparatives that are conjoined, that look like the Washoe comparative. And it raises questions about whether that's actually a real diagnostic for degreelessness or not. So I think that question is open, actually.
Yeah, I just want to add here and say that no matter what analysis you give, I think though, you still at the end of the day have to explain the difference between Washoe and English. So whatever you do to manipulate the context in English, I mean, you should be able to get the same effects as you see in Washoe, but you still see that they behave differently. So there has to be something between them that differentiates, right? Of course, an obvious difference is that in Washoe, there's no comparative, it's just conjunction. And so I think an open question too is in English, if say you try to form a conjoined comparison, which some people actually accept, I'm not one of them, for saying, you know, this ladder is tall, this ladder is not tall, do you get crisp judgments there? And I think that there's actually some experimental work going on at the University of Manchester that's investigating that. But that's just one thing to keep in mind, is that no matter what you say, you have to be able to explain why Washoe works differently from English.
Yeah, got it. Thanks.
One more minute, but we don't need to expire it, of course. Anyway, I will ask my questions later because I'm working on degree comparison, and it's very highly interesting how you put it from the point of view of formal semantics. It's very, very good. Okay, so are there any further questions? Do you see anyone? I don't see any rising hands. So I would like to say thank you very much to both speakers, Emily Henning, very nice webinar, and Andrew von Skarborden for your presentations. Very nice talk. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And we go to the next talk. This will be presented by Ying Gong, Boston University, Elizabeth Kopok, we just saw from Boston University. And it is about Mandarin has degree abstraction after all. So let's go start. Thank you so much. Elizabeth, you are the first one to speak, or I don't know. Are you there?
Yeah, so I think.
Hello. So we decided that also the discussion part and the responsibility for the length of the talk lies now in your hands and in your heart. And I am the one who is just the observer. I think it's much better because you know much better about your work and you know how to organize it much better than me. I'm only syntactician, nothing else. So thank you so much. You also, but have a nice talk. I will just watch to the time that the time will be kept and so on. Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Kopuk. Ying Gong will be taking over in the second half of this talk, and we'll be arguing that Mandarin does have degree abstraction despite claims to the contrary. By degree abstraction, we mean a configuration at LF in which there is a trace of type D for degree that is bound by a lambda abstraction operator as shown here. Beck et al. 2010 argue that there are some languages that have degree abstraction and some languages that lack it. And this is particularly interesting among languages that are thought to have degree semantics in the sense that they have gradable predicates with degree slots. Such languages are claimed to include Japanese, Mandarin, Yoruba, Samoan, and Moray. For Japanese, later work has argued that it actually does have degree abstraction. More recent work on Mandarin has actually supported the original claim that Mandarin lacks degree abstraction. But for Yoruba, there's subsequent work suggesting that it actually does have degree abstraction, and so it bears closer investigation in all of these languages. We'll be focusing on the case of Mandarin. We'll look at a few diagnostics that have been applied to Mandarin, including degree questions, sub-comparatives, scope interactions between degree quantifiers and modals, and negative island effects. Those are diagnostics from Beck et al. 2004 and 2010. And we'll also look at attributive comparatives and comparatives with embedding in standard clauses, which were discussed by Mijo Erlewine. All right, if a degree question like how tall is Captain Apollo involves movement of the WH word how, leaving a trace in the degree slot for the gradable adjective, and the WH word how triggers lambda abstraction, then a degree question would be a case of a degree abstraction configuration. Beck et al. 2010 claimed that Mandarin lacks degree questions, and they give this as evidence that Mandarin lacks degree abstraction entirely. They argued for this on the basis of the badness of one, which can actually be rescued in some contexts, but in any case, example 2, without the copula she is perfectly fine. So Mandarin does have degree questions, but maybe the point is moot because, as Erlewine points out, Mandarin Chinese is a WH in situ language, and its degree questions are not subject to syntactic islands, suggesting that movement is not involved. So let's move on to sub-comparatives. This is another kind of phenomenon in which degree abstraction is thought to be involved. Take the example, the tree is taller than the pool is deep, which involves a comparison between the height of the tree and the depth of the pool. You can make that comparison if you take than the pool is deep out of the matrix clause and leave a trace in its place. Do lambda abstraction over that trace as you QR than the pool is deep. And you also have a lambda abstraction operation inside the standard clause. So you get lambda d prime, the pool is d prime deep in the standard. With these two degree descriptions, the comparative can give the right truth conditions. There are no sub-comparatives in Mandarin. This has been observed by several authors, and Krasikova 2008 and Beck et al. 2010 use this as evidence to support the claim that Mandarin lacks degree abstraction. For Erlewine 2018, Mandarin does lack degree abstraction, but that's not why comparatives are disallowed. Erlewine posits a deletion constraint on Mandarin B comparatives where a matching, quote, local predicate must be deleted. Without going into detail about what that means, that rules out sub-comparatives on independent grounds. If this constraint is operative in Mandarin, then sub-comparatives do not provide evidence against the existence of degree abstraction in Mandarin. Although Mandarin doesn't have sub-comparatives, there are things that you might call sub-equatives in Mandarin. An example is in 6. It could be translated, I can run as fast as you can, and the structure of it is, you can run how fast, I then can run how fast. Such constructions are analyzed as WH correlatives by Chen 2019, where the WH relative pronoun actually does undergo movement as evidenced by island constraints. It undergoes movement and triggers degree abstraction. So this would be a case where we have degree abstraction going on. Another area where we might find evidence for degree abstraction would be degree quantifiers. Heim 2000 investigates the question of whether there are quantifiers over degrees, than 6 feet being a candidate, which, like quantifiers over individuals, undergo quantifier raising, leaving a trace in their original position and triggering lambda abstraction in their scope through quantifier raising. How would we know whether there are such things? Well, scope ambiguities with other operators would be a way to tell. These scope ambiguities are often missing, as Kennedy 1997 pointed out, and moreover, often the two scope readings collapse, so you can't tell whether you're getting one reading or the other. However, the two scope readings can be truth conditionally distinguished in certain cases. These include less comparatives, as in the paper is required to be 5 pages less long than that, exactly differentials, as in the paper is required to be exactly 5 pages longer than that, and comparative ellipsis constructions, as in Mary needs to drive faster than John. With the comparative ellipsis construction in 7, there are 2 possible scope configurations for the comparative. There's a boring scope configuration where the modal need takes scope over the comparative, and the truth conditions you get there are: it is necessary that the degree to which Mary drives fast exceeds the degree to which John drives fast. So it is required that Mary drive faster than John drives. The interesting scope configuration is where the comparative takes scope over need. On that configuration, the truth conditions that you get are: the degree to which Mary needs to drive D fast exceeds the degree to which John needs to drive D fast. And under certain assumptions that we don't have time to make explicit, this yields the truth conditions: Mary's minimum required speed is above John's minimum required speed. Heim designs a context in which the second reading is true and the first reading is not. So John and Mary both need to get to Boston by 8. Mary is far away in New Haven, but John is closer by in Providence. Mary needs to drive faster than John in order to get to Boston on time. Now, in this scenario, it is allowed for John to drive faster than Mary. It's just that Mary's minimum required speed is faster than John's minimum required speed. Now, with the negative antonyms, less fast and slower, Heim noticed that there's actually a difference in meaning between 8A and 8B. So John needs to drive less fast than Mary is true in this East Coast driving scenario, whereas John needs to drive slower than Mary does not seem to be true in that scenario. What we would like to point out is that there are actually 2 readings where a comparative scopes over a modal, depending on whether the negative component of the negative antonym comes with the comparative or not. So less expresses both the comparative part and the negative part. If you scope both of those over need, what you get is the degree to which John needs to drive fast is less than the degree to which Mary needs to drive fast. And that boils down to John's minimum required speed is below Mary's minimum required speed. And that reading is true in Heim's scenario. But if you take only the comparative component and leave the negative component of the negative antonym underneath the modal, what you get is the degree to which John needs to drive slow exceeds the degree to which Mary needs to drive slow. And that gives rise to a very different reading. It's a comparison of maxima reading, where John's maximum allowed speed is below Mary's maximum allowed speed. These are both readings where the comparative scopes over the modal. They're both wide scope comparative readings, but the truth conditions are very different. Now, arguing that Mandarin lacks degree abstraction, Krasikova gives the following example. It can be translated into English as John must buy fewer candles than Bill, and the structure of it is John must then Bill little buy some candles. This sentence does have a reading where must scopes over less. It is required that John buys fewer candles than Bill. And it does not have a reading where comparative plus negative component, less, scopes over must. John's minimally required amount is below Bill's. However, Krasikova does not address the possibility that this sentence has a reading where the comparative component alone scopes over the modal, which in turn scopes over little. That reading would be paraphrased, John's maximum amount allowed is below Bill's. We have not been able to determine whether this reading is available for this sentence, but we do have that kind of reading, that comparison of maxima reading for this sentence, sentence 10. Consider a context where the speed limit on I-90 is 60 miles per hour, and the speed limit on I-95 is 80 miles per hour. In this context, you can say 10. You on I-90 need, then on I-95, drive slow. You need to drive more slowly on I-90 than on 95 is how it could be translated into English. If you take the comparative and scope it over need, but leave slow, the negative antonym, under need, as suggested by the fact that you have slow as a single word in the example, then the reading that you would get would be the minimum degree to which you need to drive slow on I-90 is below the minimum degree to which you need to drive slow on I-95. The minimum degree to which you need to drive slow on I-90 is the minimum degree such that in all possible worlds, you don't drive that fast. So it boils down to saying that the maximum acceptable speed on I-90 is below the maximum acceptable speed in I-95. So that would be a comparison of maxima reading. And indeed, 10 can be judged true even if it is acceptable to drive 50 miles per hour on I-90, but 40 miles per hour on I-95. So this sentence does not impose any requirements on the relative speeds on which you drive on these two highways. This suggests that can in fact scope over a modal in these kinds of comparative ellipsis constructions. And with that, I will turn it over to Ying Gong.
Thanks, Liz. Okay, I will continue with the test related to embedding, which also involves comparative ellipses, but in quite a different way. So English allows embedded standard like 11, Mary is happier than Bill thinks she is, where the standard she is happy is embedded under think, and the degree adjective happy is deleted. It's also possible to have both an embedded associate and an embedded standard in one sentence, like in 12. To interpret such sentences, it requires degree abstraction because they involve descriptions of a degree that crosses a clause boundary. Following Irwin 2018, Mandarin B comparatives are derived via deletion, as in 13, where under certain assumptions, the local predicate in the associate clause is deleted under identity condition. It follows that a sentence like 14, which is intended to mean Mary is happier than John thinks she is, should be ruled out in Mandarin because the local predicate in the associate clause, which is happy, is not identical to the local predicate in the standard clause, namely think she is happy. So the badness of 14 is expected given the deletion requirement. However, even if you have two identical local predicates that satisfy the deletion requirement, you still can't construct sentences with an intended meaning that John thinks Mary is happier than Bill thinks she is. Irwin explains the badness of 15 on the grounds that Mandarin lacks degree abstraction, so that 15 is impossible because the degree variable within the embedded clauses cannot be bound across a clause. However, if we take a closer look on these deletion constructions, we find that although comparatives with embedded TPs are bad, comparatives with embedded small clauses are fine, as in 17. John and Bill make Mary happy. It's okay with the meaning that John makes Mary happier than Bill does. So the contrast between 16 and 17 seems to suggest that there could be a syntactic way to rule out 16, but not 17. We suggest that it can be captured by posing another deletion requirement, which along the lines of 18, that deleting a predicate containing a TP is disallowed, but deleting a predicate containing a small clause is fine. Actually, the same contrast is also found in English. So 19A, John thinks Mary is happier than Bill does is bad, but 19B, John makes Mary happier than Bill does is good. And English is indeed a plus DAP language. So taken together, we argue that this piece of data point does not necessarily suggest that Mandarin lacks degree abstraction. The next test is based on attributive comparatives such as 12, 20. John bought bigger apples than Bill. Attributive comparatives are derived through attributive comparative deletion, which involves WH movement of a null operator. So as shown here in the then clause, the degree variable within the DP is bound by a lambda operator outside the TP. So it requires degree abstraction. Irwin 2018, based on sentences at 21, suggests that attributive comparatives are absent in Mandarin, hence Mandarin lacks degree abstraction. So in 21, it seems that neither the quantity nor the degree attributive comparative is allowed. We share the same judgment here, but we find that the examples can be rescued as long as you include the overt degree morpheme gen in them, as in 22. So we do apparently have attributive comparatives in Mandarin after all, just not the ones we look at first. It is a separate question why gen is required here, but not in other B comparatives, and it's an interesting one. We suspect that it's related to Grundle's T plus B constraint, which would require a DEC-P to be inserted between T and AP. So if we assume that prenominal degree adjectives are parsed as relative clauses in Mandarin, it would require a DEC head to be filled. And in comparatives, it's realized as gen. There are some remaining problems of this account, but that's a different topic. For degree abstraction here, we think the point is clear that Mandarin has attributive comparatives, and this is in favor of plus DAP. The last test is negative island effects. We actually have some critiques on the logic of this test. So negative island effects are found in sentences like 24, John bought a more expensive book than Bill didn't buy. It's weird, but why? So the then clause in 24 denotes a set of degrees that are formed through degree abstraction as in 25. Lambda D, Bill didn't buy a D expensive book. And then with a comparative, you are taking the maximum degree of this set. The problem is we can't define such a maximum degree because the price Bill didn't pay can go infinitely high. Unlike English, in Mandarin, similar constructions do have a sensible reading. So 27 has a reading that the book John bought is more expensive than the book Bill didn't buy. Krasikova, followed by Beck and Dahl, takes 27 as evidence that Mandarin is insensitive to negative island effects, and therefore argues that Mandarin lacks degree abstraction, saying that the then clause in Mandarin does not denote a set of degrees. But it's not really the case. 27 is structurally different from those sentences with negative island effects. As we have marked here, it involves relative clauses. So it actually involves a definite description of a book, which is surely interpretable. What's more, Mandarin is indeed sensitive to negative island effects, as shown in 28. So suppose John bought a more expensive book than Bill didn't buy, has the reading that John bought a more expensive book than the one Bill didn't buy. Could this reading be predicted from lacking degree abstraction? the answer seems to be no, because it's actually related to a definite interpretation. Then, what sort of reading would give evidence for lacking degree abstraction is not yet clear to us. Okay, in conclusion, first, Mandarin does have degree questions, but that can really be used as evidence that it has degree abstraction because Mandarin is a WH in situ language. Then we showed that Mandarin, although it lacks sub-comparatives, it does have sub-equatives, and that is possible evidence for degree abstraction. We showed scope interactions with modals, again giving evidence for degree abstraction. We showed that with certain types of verbs, you can have embedding in a standard clause of a comparative ellipsis construction. It's not clear to us entirely whether we can draw a positive conclusion on this basis, because that conclusion would rely on a number of assumptions. But we did show that Mandarin does have attributive comparatives, contrary to previous claims, so that is further evidence for degree abstraction. And we showed that negative pattern effects do exist in Mandarin, but we argue that this test does not provide any evidence with respect to degree abstraction. So again and again, we find evidence going against previous claims. Many languages that are claimed to be minus DAP are argued to have degree abstraction as well. Taken together, all of this evidence starts to cast doubt on the degree abstraction parameter as a parameter. So the question then is degree abstraction universal, or are there languages where we really have solid evidence that there is no degree abstraction? We think it's an open question. There have been additional studies on degree abstraction in other languages, and evidence in favor of degree abstraction has been found in all of those. So we look forward to further studies on this issue. And that's all we have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this wonderful talk. We have some more little time. We have still 5 minutes or more, 7 minutes. And you have said, Liz or Elizabeth, if I may say, you will arrange your own question-answer turn-taking system. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So actually, I have one question, but I will ask it as last if there is time. Are there?
I see we got a hand raised from Grano.
Mhm.
Please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Oh yeah, okay, now I see it, yes.
Okay, great. So I had this does not affect your main point at all, but regarding attributive comparatives on slide 21, where you had that really interesting contrast where it basically you have to have that overt dung to do the attributive comparative. And I was really happy to see the reference to my T plus V constraint to explain that, but I'm not quite sure I see how it works, because one of the main points that led up to that constraint, one of the main data points was that in the right context, you can just say Zhangcan Gao, Zhangcan tall, and that means Zhangcan is taller, which I treated as involving a covert comparative morpheme satisfying the T plus V constraint. So then the question is, why is it that works in a matrix context where you just have Zhangcan tall, but for some reason in an attributive context that does not work? And I'm still not sure. I'm not sure I see why there would be that difference. So in other words, I think 21 is still a puzzle, to make a long story short.
Thanks for your question. Yeah, I may have a word to say here that I do, but like unfortunately, I may argue against your covert comparative operator here. I have some evidence from some GAN comparatives that's showing that Gan is indeed an overt comparative morpheme in Mandarin, and that you might need, and also the covert comparatives that you're mentioning, that Zhang tall, meaning Zhang is taller than someone in the context, could be derived from some other constructions like focus or contrastive focus or something that. So yes, that's a good question, but then I would say that I may argue against the covert comparative morpheme, so that you would then need again to satisfy the T plus fig constraint in that context.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the question. Do we have other questions?
Actually, if I may, I had a very nice talk given by a famous guy, Ross is his name, Hutch, here in Potsdam. He was, of course, talking about his islands, negative islands. And I have just one question to a Mandarin, because as we know, WH movement is actually silent, or it's in situ, there is no movement. Whether you can make some evidence on comparison, I don't know, even any example which I could, something like who seems to be greater than X or something like that, if there is any evidence that your analysis on degree, or let's say on comparison, is supported by the fact that if you have a movement out of an adjunct clause, like for example, who didn't do it well, something like that, that you can also have it inside of a comparative coordinated trace, who didn't make it better than who did it, something like that. So if there is any evidence that the fact that you don't have actually a covered movement, an overt movement of the WH phrases in Mandarin, gives you also a supportive evidence for your analysis of comparatives, and especially with regard to negative islands. Just don't have any good idea, because my Mandarin is not good enough to think about it. It's still there, but it just any evidence.
So I'm trying to share my screen. Is it showing?
Oh yes, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So maybe Ying, you can talk about these examples.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't have right now, don't have an example about the negative island effects, but we do have something to show that in the W correlative that we call the sub-equatives,
Yes.
you do find that the WH word is subject to certain island effects, including coordinate structure constraint. So the table, how wide and 2 meter none, so you're calling it how wide and 2 meter none, you cannot move how wide out and then to form this, the door is as that wide, right? And also in left branch condition, he has one child, how tall, which is a modifying child, a child is how tall. And then in this case, you cannot move how tall out of this MP, which is needed to form the later, the man is that tall. So
it's very interesting, you know,
yeah.
because I just, in my new book, Syntax of Meaning and Meaning of Syntax, there is some evidence about languages like Mandarin, and also a language which is spoken in Kenya, that there is, that the effects actually, they can be just subsumed under the label of freezing and die-freezing. So we have really these guys, you know, like adjuncts coming out of an adjunct clause, and they cannot be, they are not licensed, because they just, you cannot just one part of an adjunct clause, like something like how didn't he do it, you can just take it out and then the rest is negated. So this is in any language in the world, and I think that it will be also in the case of Mandarin, the case, and even in this Kenya language. I just try to find out, and actually it's subverted to actually it's an issue which is due to the fact that actually merge over move, the analysis by Chomsky is really supported by these facts as well. I was so happy that it's true, not because it's Chomsky, but because I also see, and I mean, my friend Geron Müller, he has a lot of examples of such cases. Thank you so much for your wonderful talk. I see no other hands or
yeah, there's a comment.
is there
Thank you.
any
Yeah, that's
last
interesting.
comment, of course, we will take, of course, Elizabeth. I'm very interested in the discussion. Yeah. Is there anyone? Yeah. A minor comment, I see. Okay, about.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So you think it means, yeah, would you like to say something about that?
The one who is sending it.
Sun?
So Sun Yenan, somebody is asking. So can he speak? I don't know whether.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, it's just my comment, but I'm kind of not sure, like, if it's how to distinguish between those two meanings. But like my intuitive meaning is the comparison is like on the outer structure. Yeah, so I don't know what you think about that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I do share the same judgment with you, that it can be mean that it's actually the verb make that is carrying more about like a degree stuff. But as we said, that does not go against degree abstraction class in Mandarin, right? And also that may involve how you analyze the verb make, that whether it can take a degree argument with it or not. If make cannot take a degree argument as an argument, then you still need to assume, I think you still need to assume that the degree abstraction happens here in order to have this comparison of making, right? So yeah, I do share this judgment, but I don't think this is against our claim.
Yeah, because there can be construction specific. This is causative, and if there is outside of causative, it's still there. Thank you so much. I would like to thank the both referees of this wonderful talk, and thank you very much once again. So there is one again, Helen Kulidobrova, or how it is spelled. Maybe one last comment, please. What did you? I don't know. I don't see anything. You comment. What do you want? So, do you want to say it? Yes,
Helen,
please.
Helen, yeah.
Yes,
Go
yes.
on, Helen.
Can you see me? I can't see myself at all. Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Yes. So I was just sitting here double checking a paper by Vera Hohaus and colleagues, and I'm thinking there's now acquisitional predictions on Mandarin, right? So if Mandarin were to be said a minus DSP or minus DAP language, then all sorts of comparative structures would sort of come in together, or could be sort of spread out across the acquisitional universe. But now it is a language just like English, and therefore we expect, so here's when your unmarked adjectives will come in, and then 6 months later we'll start seeing some contextually marked adjectives, comparatives rather, and after that we'll see some other kinds of things. So there's now acquisitional predictions that are pretty tightly constrained.
Anyway, I think
our work cut out for us.
Asked, before I took over this position or whatever it is function, there was something said we shouldn't make too sorry for this too large comments, but also we have also a time limit, and we have the next speakers. We should keep the time, and so it's very interesting what you say. Of course, maybe you can discuss it after the session. There is still time. I don't know how you do it, but you will do it. So thank you so much for your wonderful questions, and we will close this part, and we will come to the next talk, and you will also try to or will, so to say, organize your own questions, answers afterwards. And this talk goes now about another interesting subject on the nature of arguments in event nominals. And this is a talk given by Irina, sorry, I'm in a bad, no, I'm in the right one. Oh, sorry, I was in the right. So sorry, it is about the subject is now, sorry, it's about, where is it? I don't find it actually. Okay, so same parallelism and presupposition. Sorry, I have mixed it with another paper. So it is given here, and you will start and you just do your work. Same parallelism and presuppositions, Daniel Hart, Lina Mikkelsen from Schopenhauer, and University of California, Berkeley, UCB. So thank you. Sorry for this. I'm a little bit tired. It's too late here. Thank you.
Thank you. In this talk, we're concerned with a puzzle originally pointed out by Irene Heim in her 1985 paper on comparatives. And the puzzle goes as follows. First, consider 1 and 2. Ornette Coleman played the same tune as Don Cherry. Ornette Coleman played a different tune than Don Cherry. Both are well formed. However, when we look at 3 and 4, a contrast emerges. So 4, Ornette Coleman played a different tune than this one is fine, but 3, Ornette Coleman played the same tune as this one is degraded. Heim, in fact, gives it a star and a question mark. We give it here an infelicity mark because we're going to argue that the problem with 3 is pragmatic. In particular, it's presupposition failure because same presupposes an eventuality and different does not. And that's why they behave differently in 3 and 4. So do we have any evidence for the presuppositional nature of same outside of comparatives? We believe we do. First, consider run-of-the-mill examples like 5. Ornette Coleman played Street Woman and Don Cherry played the same tune. Here, the eventuality presupposition of same is someone played a tune. And that is satisfied or bound by the first clause, Ornette Coleman played Street Woman. So that's how a run-of-the-mill example with same works. It has this presupposition, in this case, someone played a tune, and it's bound by the preceding clause, Ornette Coleman played Street Woman. So far we've seen this is requirement for a preceding clause, but how do we know that it's a presupposition? So first piece of evidence is that negation makes that eventuality inaccessible. So 6 is just like the previous example, except we negated the first clause. Ornette Coleman didn't play Street Woman, but Don Cherry played the same tune. And now same is infelicitous. Why is that? Same has again its presupposition, someone played a tune, but that presupposition is not satisfied by the negated clause. That is, from being told that Ornette Coleman didn't play Street Woman, we cannot infer that someone played a tune. And that means that the presupposition is not satisfied and therefore same is infelicitous. To see that the issue is a matter of eventualities and not individuals, we can compare 6 to 7. So in 7, which is felicitous, Ornette Coleman didn't play Street Woman, but Don Cherry played it. We've replaced the same tune with it. And all it requires is that there's an accessible individual antecedent, and that is Street Woman, which is of course not blocked off by negation because it's a proper name. So if all same was interested in or needed was an individual antecedent, an entity like Street Woman, then 6 should be fine. But it is not fine, and that is because same also requires an eventuality. And that's why 6 is infelicitous. Now, how do we know that these are presuppositions? Well, we can run the classic family of sentences tests, in particular the question test and the conditional test. So we do that in 8. Again, we keep our negated first clause, Ornette Coleman didn't play Street Woman. Did Don Cherry play the same tune? Is ill-formed, showing that same has this presupposition even inside of a question. Or 9, Ornette Coleman didn't play Street Woman. If Don Cherry played the same tune, the audience would know it. So again, it projects out of the antecedent of a conditional. Back to comparatives. So we have 3 kinds of comparatives. Clausal comparatives, Imani ate more apples than Jaden ate. Reduced phrasal comparatives, Imani ate more apples than Jaden, which has a silent 8 that's been elided. And unreduced phrasal comparatives, Imani ate more apples than Jaden, where all we see is a DP following than. This means that the surface string than Jaden could be like 11, reduced from Jaden 8, or could be like 12, just what we see on the surface, namely a DP. Whereas that 13, then Jaden is ambiguous, some phrasal comparatives are unambiguous. as we see in 14. Ornette Coleman played a different tune than this one. There is no possible clausal source in 14. Then this one can therefore only be an unreduced phrasal comparative with the parse in 15. Ornette Coleman played a different tune than this one. Why is this important? It's important because it relates to eventualities. When we have a reduced phrasal comparative, that makes an eventuality available via its clausal source. So then Jaden ate, there's an eating eventuality inside the then clause. But an unreduced phrasal comparative does not make any eventuality available, just an individual. So if then Jaden is just then followed by a DP, there is no eventuality introduced. So now we're in a position to solve Heim's puzzle. Remember, it is why is 16 infelicitous? Ornette Coleman played the same tune as this one. As we just saw, there is no clausal source available in 16. The as clause is just the DP, or the as phrase just contains a DP. Because there's no clausal source available, 16 can only be an unreduced phrasal comparative, and unreduced phrasal comparatives do not provide an eventuality. On the other hand, same presupposes an eventuality, here again that someone played a tune. There's no antecedent or nothing to bind that presupposition, which means that 16 results from presupposition failure of that eventuality presupposition. So that's our account of why 16 is infelicitous. Now, we also have to explain why 17 is felicitous. Ornette Coleman played the same tune as Don Cherry. And that's because here we have a reduced phrasal parse available. So as I put in there, or we put in there Don Cherry played, we have an underlying clausal source. And such clausal sources do make an eventuality available. That means that Same's eventuality presupposition is satisfied and 17 is felicitous. Finally, we turn to different. The key difference between same and different that we propose here is that different does not presuppose an eventuality. And we can see that in 18, which is a variant of one of our earlier examples, Ornette Coleman didn't play Street Woman, instead he played a different tune. So even though there's negation in the first clause, different is felicitous in the second clause. And that indicates that there is no eventuality presupposition that different projects. This in turn explains why different is licensed in both reduced and unreduced phrasal comparatives. So 19, we have the reduced one, Ornette Coleman played a different tune than Don Cherry. But also in 20, Ornette Coleman played a different tune than this one, is felicitous because there's no requirement for an eventuality. So that's the contrast between same and different. Having dealt with Heim's puzzle, we now want to turn to another eventuality presupposition trigger, namely 2, the additive particle. So 2 also presupposes an eventuality. So in 21, Ornette Coleman played Street Woman, Don Cherry played it too. 2 has the presupposition someone played a tune, satisfied by Ornette Coleman played Street Woman. But 22 shows that if we negate that first clause, Ornette Coleman didn't play Street Woman. 2 becomes infelicitous, Don Cherry played it too. So that's explained if 2 has exactly the same kind of eventuality presupposition that same has. And in fact, same and 2 track each other in terms of distribution. So when we have a positive antecedent clause, as in 23, Don Cherry played Street Woman, both are felicitous in the follow-up clause. If we have a negative antecedent clause, as in 24, both are infelicitous. However, same and 2 come apart when we consider so-called internal readings licensed by a quantifier. So an example of an internal reading is given in 25. Every trumpeter played the same tune. 25 allows an internal reading, which is, if a trumpeter played some tune X, then every other trumpeter played tune X. Notice importantly that this internal reading does not require identification of X. That is, we can judge whether it's true or false without knowing what tune we're talking about. Because this internal reading is available, 25 is acceptable without an external antecedent. So we could ask, how was the concert? And answer, every trumpeter played the same tune, and have that be felicitous. And that is because there's no requirement of an identification or prior identification of the tune. So far, we're not saying anything new. The internal readings of same have been discussed extensively. But to our knowledge, what has not been noticed is that 2 does not license an internal reading. So 26, every trumpeter played the tune 2. I cannot use as an answer to the question, how was the concert? So the fact that 26 is not acceptable without an external antecedent indicates that it lacks an internal reading. That is, 26 cannot mean that there is some tune X that every trumpeter played without prior identification of X. If we provide prior identification of X, 2 becomes felicitous, as in 27. Charlie Hayden played Street Woman, every trumpeter played the tune 2. But in the absence of such a prior clause, every trumpeter played the tune 2 is infelicitous. So that's a stark contrast between same and 2. Before we can talk about why we think 2 does not generate an internal reading, we have to talk about how internal readings are generated for same. And here we will give a simplified version of Hart and Mickelson's 2020 account. So consider 28, our example of an internal reading. Every trumpeter played the same tune. Here we have the restrictor trumpeter in red, and we have the nucleoscope played the same tune in green. The assertion given in a sort of simplified discourse representation theory notation is given below, where the quantifier sits in the middle, the restrictor is to the left, the trumpeter, and the nucleoscope is to the right, played the same tune. And the parse of this is for every trumpeter U0, there is a tune U1 that U0 played, and U1 is identical to some contextually identified U3. So that's what we've seen in the other cases, that contextually identified U3 was provided by an antecedent clause. So that's the assertion, uncontroversial. What we're proposing, that's the novelty of our account, or of Hart and Mickelson 2020, is that there's an eventuality presupposition associated with same, and that's given in blue. Some trumpeter U2 played some tune U3. That's the one who's been paraphrasing, like someone played a tune. So we now have an assertion part and an eventuality presupposition. In all the other cases we looked at, the eventuality presupposition was bound by a preceding clause, or Ned Coleman played Street Woman. However, there is no antecedent clause to bind it, and when we can't bind a presupposition, we have to accommodate it. So here we're going to follow Van de Sant, 1992, how to accommodate a presupposition. So in particular, if a presupposition arises inside the nucleoscope, then it can be accommodated into the restrictor, and that's what we see below here. So before or to the left of every, or above every, we have the restrictor, which contains the trumpeter, which it contained before, but now also the eventuality presupposition has been accommodated into the restrictor in blue. And then we have the nucleoscope as before, played the same tune. And the truth conditions here are for every pair of trumpeters, U0 and U2, where U2 played a tune U3, there is a tune U1 that U0 played, and U1 is equal to 3. That is, we get pairwise quantification over trumpeters and tunes. And that's exactly what we need to generate the internal reading. So we have just seen that internal readings are generated by a presupposition trigger, same, being within the nucleoscope of the quantifier. So same appears within the nucleoscope, and it can therefore generate internal readings. We tentatively suggest that 2 cannot appear within the nucleoscope and therefore cannot generate internal readings. There are 2 possible avenues for supporting this. One is that syntactically 2 must attach at the clausal level and is therefore outside the scope. A semantic possibility is that 2 applies to objects of type T, and the nucleoscope is of type ET, and therefore 2 cannot appear inside or adjoined to the nucleoscope. So to sum up, Heim's puzzle dissolves once we recognize that same carries an eventuality presupposition and different does not. And we've also looked at the distribution of same compared to 2, where we saw that like same, 2 carries an eventuality presupposition, but unlike same, 2 cannot generate internal readings. And we suggested that this is because 2 attaches outside the nuclear scope. Thank you.
Fantastic, and you kept time. Really, so we have wow, exactly 10 minutes until the end of this. For me, it's the night, it's the evening. For you, it's the day, it's the session. Okay, so please, you told me that you would wish to organize your own question answers.
I can't see the chat. How do I see the chat? Unshare?
The chat is actually, I look. So there is one, yeah, I can, I see here one is asking something. This is Nick Fleischer. I ask you to ask. I see him
Yes.
here in this, in this
Okay.
chat room.
Thank you. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
hi, Nick.
Hi, Lena.
Hi.
This was really interesting. Thank you. I have a question and an observation to ask about. So, related to the internal reading that you were just talking about towards the end of the talk. So if I understand correctly, the prediction would be that in the internal reading, the eventuality involved in that internal reading shouldn't be available to get picked up later in a subsequent clause. And so I think that, so I have an example that I'll read, and I think I know what my own judgment about it is, but I'll ask you too. So if you say every trumpeter played the same tune, and we followed up by saying, and then John played the same tune, I think that's awkward. And I think your account predicts that because the eventuality shouldn't be able to be picked up. And if you contrast that with a follow-up where you just use a pronoun to pick up the individual, I think it's quite fine. So you say every trumpeter played the same tune, and then John played it too. That's completely flawless. So I'm just curious about your thoughts on that.
I'm writing it down. I mean, Dan, maybe you can say more about this, or you can, Nick. It went by me like, why is it that there's no eventuality available from the internal reading?
Well, I guess, yeah, maybe I should rephrase the comment. So on the internal reading, because I was thinking about this too, like if same introduces an eventuality presupposition, then and you say every trumpeter played the same tune. There, you described, I guess, how the presupposition of same kind of gets satisfied internally there, but it seemed to me like there wouldn't necessarily be a way for that eventuality to be accessible from outside of that structure. But I mean, maybe that's wrong. Maybe I've just misunderstood that. But to me, the contrast between those two follow-ons seems real.
Mm-hmm.
There is one suggestion by our organizers that if you, of course, you need now the screen to share it, but if you don't share it, then you see the chat. The people who are asking you, just, yeah. So.
Dan, do you want to say something in response to Nick?
I'm thinking. So, I mean, one of the things that it makes me think about with the pronoun, like, every trumpeter played the same tune, and then what was the other thing? Somebody else played it, where you could use the pronoun to refer to that tune. I mean, I guess maybe that has to do with the if you think about accessibility in terms of the syntax of DRT, that's surprising. But if you think about presuppositions in terms of what you can infer to exist, maybe it's, then you can infer that there is this tune. So from a more purely semantic view of presupposition, maybe it's not surprising that you can refer to that tune because there must be some tune that exists. Although I'm not sure what that says about your first example with the eventuality not being accessible, because that also ought to, I mean, you know, Adrian Versavino's paper about the different, I mean, he points out things, he's very conscious of accessibility that is within, made available sort of within the scope of universal quantifiers. So if you say something like every trumpeter played a different tune, then of course you could say they were all Baroque tunes or jazz or whatever. So you can refer to the plurality. So so I think
I don't know if it's in place, if I may intervene as a musician, but there is also something about semantics of tune. You know, is it really clear what we have on our mind, also from the point of view of some syntactic semantics? So we talk about general quantifiers and things like that. I mean, the thing is, what does she really want to say? What is really the intention of her? Saying something like the same tune doesn't necessarily mean it's identical. It just means that it's in the way how it usually one plays, because if you play in the same instrument, the same melody, it's always another thing. And this is why I think that language gives us this possibility to make it a little bit, I don't say vague. Yeah, it's vague. It's not ambiguous. It's vague because it's not resolved. It's never resolved in the end. It has to be open. That's why I think that your suggestion is on the right track. Your name is Daniel. I think that you are on the right track. I can't express it because I'm syntactician. I'm not formal semantician, but I know a little bit about the work of Angelika Kratzer and Anastasia Giannakidou and all those guys, of course. And so I was a little bit concerned with this, but I think that there is something about the nature of the general quantifier over this. What does it really mean? It has to be more or less open for all events in a given situation for all x which are meant to be true. So I think that this is something which maybe Angelika Kratzer would resolve on the with the backgrounds that conversational backgrounds. I think you cannot really resolve it on the purely formal semantic level, because it's just, you know, the nature of music is different than the nature of formal semantics. It's just like, I mean, if you play, I mean, I played with Jim McCauley, who was a semantician as well, and we know how we played. It's just it has to be in the natural language. We have to have some open window, so to say, to have this room for save the sentence in the way that we understand it, and it has to be comprehended in the right way. And that's, I don't know how to describe it. It's really very, very, very weird. I think formally you can describe it somehow. Though those guys like you who are really specialists in formal semantics, you will find a way. But I think it has to be a little bit open. The term of the same tune has to have some kind of openness to the interpretation, to say it more or less colloquial. I cannot say it better. But it's a very nice example, actually, to see what same, you know, in German, you have the problem. If you say, das ist dieselbe Frau, you mean only really the same identical person X. Das ist dieselbe Frau. Die gleiche is not the same. So what you say, and for tunes, dieselbe Melodie, you cannot say it. Die gleiche, you have to say. It means similar, more or less. It's open. The tune is a very good example to show that it has to do with the arguments that you are talking about the events actually and arguments. Sorry for dominating this session. It was, I didn't want to do it because it was highly interesting. It's exactly 9:30 in our place in Berlin. I want to wish you all, guys, if there is somebody else who wants to ask question, please do it now. We can, of course, do a little bit longer because we started later. Is there anybody else who wants to ask a question? If not, I would like, I think you have now maybe those guys who are in USA on the Pacific coast. What time is it there? 12? Isn't it time to go for a lunch or something like that? I have eaten already. So thank you so much for your sessions. It was both sessions that I have chaired were wonderful, and I'm so happy to see so many young and prosperous people who will show us how to do linguistics in the near future and who still do it. Thank you so much. Many greetings to my friends in Chicago, in anywhere. You all are also here. I see some of you are here, John Beaver, people like this. Thank you so much. I will go. And what about if you want to discuss, I think you can still do it somehow. I don't know how to do it technically, but I think there is some possibility to do it. I myself will say good night to all people. And I do it because here it's night, starting night. I will do it in my mother tongue. And Ivona Kucherova knows this language. She's namely, she's also Czech like me by origin. Dobrou noc. You can also say it in Chinese or whatever. Good night from my point of view, good day for you. And hopefully the situation in USA will clear up soon and we will have a normal situation which we had before 5 years ago. It was still quite good. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. It's my own opinion. You can have another one. Doesn't matter. I want to share you the opinion that I'm happy that all the troubles will come to an end, and COVID as well. Bye-bye. Thank you for sharing you with me and me with you. And the talks were wonderful. Thank you so much. Have a nice time. Bye-bye.
I'm thinking about Lena's question in the chat now.
Because we barely looked at that, but I think it's different from there. Also, when it occurs with same.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Every trumpeter, no, that's the candidate one. The tune example, and wait, no, that's Yanon's comment. Sorry, I'm looking for the original sentence to try with that tune.
Oh, the one from Nick?
Yeah.
Yeah, so every trumpeter played the same tune, and then John played that tune as well.
That's better. That's better than with same. Yeah, I think the one with same and Afra is not. I agree with Nick's judgment there.
Yeah.
I was thinking that that's because you need a 2. So if you say every trumpeter played the same tune and John played the same tune too, then it's fine, right?
Yeah, definitely. The 2 definitely saves it.
Yeah, I think that certainly improves it.
And I think that has been observed robustly that in some cases, if 2 is possible, then it's obligatory.
Yeah.
And of maximize presupposition. Yeah.
Yeah, and the same is usually same and 2. We find that they are complementary distribution, but in this case, the same is used up kind of by the internal reading, and that's why you need the 2.
But so then does the presupposition of the second occurrence of same just?
So that's an internal reading as well, right? Or wait a second.
But it's in a subsequent. I mean, it's in a later clause, right? So it's. I mean, it's
right.
Just, I don't have a story, but I'm just kind of curious about.
Right. Right. So every trumpeter played the same tune, and John played the same tune too. Right. So I think the presupposition has to be somebody played something, right? And that would be satisfied by the every trumpeter played the same tune.
Mm-hmm.
But then why do we need a 2 as well?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's possible that what the 2 is doing is kind of bringing out a reading that is actually not the internal reading of the first clause.
Yeah.
Actually, they're all just anaphoric.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to write that down.
Nick, can you say that again?
Well, my thought was that in the case where you say every trumpeter played the same tune and then John played the same tune too, that in that case, I think that the tunes played by the trumpeters and the tune played by John all sort of have to be anaphoric to, I mean, there has to be some, I mean, then there's some tune that you have to be able to pick up, right?
Oh, really? So that can't stand by itself?
I think that, yeah, I mean.
We'll try it with an overt standard. So every trumpeter played the same tune as each other. And then John played it too. Or,
Yeah,
I mean,
that
that's
seems
kind of odd
fun.
anyway. But that would force the internal reading.
Right.
Or the non-anaphoric reading at least.
Hmm.
So, Emily, you know more about comparatives than I do, which is not hard. So this idea that there are these unreduced phrasal comparatives in English, I understand to be kind of controversial. But
Right.
it also seems to me that ours are special because they don't involve comparison of degrees. They just involve comparison of individuals.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a paper under review about as relatives with same kind of. So I'm very sympathetic to this view. And I do think that they do work differently with degrees than with degrees. And there, to be honest, there's not a ton of work on that. So there's all of like the ellipsis tests for reduced phrasal comparatives and stuff, as I'm sure you're aware of. But then in terms of different and same, I just don't think that those have been. I think I tried at some point to do the tests, and then with same, it just gets a bit confusing because you always wind up with the same truth conditions no matter which one you try to use. And then sometimes the judgment get a little bit fuzzy. Yeah, I don't think I answered your question. That was kind of a rant, but.
But can you send us your paper?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, it's under review, so fingers crossed. It's not about, yeah, I mean, the stuff that you guys talk about at all, but it's tangentially related, so maybe it'll be
Well, just to get a handle on these comparisons of individuals.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the talk and enjoy the rest of the day, I guess.
I even got to hear another talk by you this morning on nominalizations.
Yes, I decided to record the second one for this session because I thought 2 in a row might be a bit too tiring because it is almost 9 o'clock now because I'm in England. So it is a bit, yeah. I think that ended up being a good decision.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool.
And thank you, Nick, as well to you.
Oh, thank you for a really interesting talk. And
yeah, it was great. Thank you guys.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
bye, everyone.